today. Great. So why don't we jump in and get started? Thank you for joining us for the second day of the Beginner Gardener Intensive. Just a little bit about who we are. Kate, if you want to hit the next slide. We are Grow NYC. And before we get to that, oh, yep, there we go. Okay, so we are Grow NYC. If you have ever been to the Union Square Farmers Market, that's us. But we, in addition to all of our food access, there's a lot more that we do, education being one of them. So Laura and I are with our School Gardens program. Jackie and Kate, who are presenting today, are with our Zero Waste Schools program. So we are going to talk about soil health today, but we have a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. First off, if you have questions for us, please put them in the Q&A. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a little button that says Q&A, and that's where you can put questions that we'll read out to Kate and Jackie at the end. We are recording, so if you miss any of today's workshop, or if you want to rewatch it because the info is just so good, we will send you the link in a follow-up post where you'll be able to see the video and any resources that are mentioned today as well. If you are tuning in for multiple days with us, you can use the same Zoom link all week. So you should already have it if you are here. And just a quick recap, yesterday was, we had garden basics yesterday. Today is soil health and compost. Tomorrow, if you're tuning in, our teaching garden from Governor's Island is going to teach us how to increase garden production. And on Friday, our session is on indoor gardening ideas. So we hope that you are joining us for all, but we're happy to have you for as many as we can. So without further, I'm going to turn it over to Jackie and Kate, who are going to teach us about soil health and compost.
Thanks, Kristen. Hi, everyone. It is great to see where you're all coming from in the chat and to see so many New Yorkers here and even people from outside of New York. We just had Dorothy from Nebraska pop up in the chat. So it's great to see you all. It was great to see a couple of names from schools that I've personally worked with in the chat. So hi, Louise, and hi, a few other people out there. And we're excited to speak with you today about soil health and compost. Jackie and I are both with Grow NYC's Zero Waste Schools program. And so we spend our time working with schools in New York City to help them participate in waste diversion practices, including our organics collection program that New York City has that was paused for a year but is coming back. So we spend a lot of time working with students and teachers in schools on collecting food scraps to turn into compost. Today, in today's workshop, we're going to learn about soil health and how soil health really does equal garden health, testing for soil, particularly texture and nutrients, why we should compost, how to compost, and then wrapping it all up with soil compost and climate connections. So jumping right in, soil health equals garden health. Charles Kellogg was the head of soil survey in the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA, for about 40 years, for 37 years, from 1934 to 1971. And he spent a lot of time thinking about soils, working with soils. And I just loved this quote. Essentially, all life depends upon the soil. There can be no life without soil and no soil without life. They have evolved together. So healthy soils equal healthy gardens, equal healthy planet, equals healthy humans. Soil really is tied up in so much of in life on Earth. It's not a hyperbole to say that. So what is soil? We can buy it in a bag to put in our garden beds, but soil really is that topmost layer of the earth. It's that top layer of the earth where we can grow things. It's formed from the weathering of rocks over time, from water events and from wind and from waves, from the erosion of rocks, making those pieces smaller and smaller and smaller. So soil is made up of mineral particles, but it's also made up of organic material. So all of the once living things, as they break down, they become what's called the humus in soil. And that's what provides nutrients to plants to grow, right? The organic material. So soil is mineral particles, organic materials, and then it's made up of air and water and living organisms, lots and lots of living organisms in that soil. In fact, in 1 gram or like a teaspoon of healthy soil, there are millions of microorganisms in that soil. You might not be able to see them, but they're there in healthy living soil. And that soil with those minerals and the organic matter and air and water and living organisms are what supports plant life and is vital to life on Earth. Soil helps to retain water, which means that as water passes through, either from rain or from if we're watering something, it holds on to the water instead of the water just running off. So it holds on to water, and soil is a carbon sink. And this is something we'll get to later on in the presentation when we make that soil climate connection. So soil is fascinating stuff, and no matter where you are growing, if you happen to have a plot of land and you're growing like this luxurious looking farm here, growing some beautiful plants, or if you are growing on your balcony or on a windowsill in a container or even in a raised bed, this is a picture from our teaching garden raised beds, you're going to be growing in soil for the most part. 95% of all food is grown in soil. You could have a hydroponic system, but for the most part, we're growing our foods, plants, flowers in soil. And so understanding soil health is integral in having healthy plants. We all want to have those lush, vibrant, healthy tomato plants or whatever it is that you discussed yesterday. So what is soil health and how can we tell that soil is healthy? Soil health is much like the definition of sustainability. It really is the ability of soil to, over time, continue to be able to grow and support living plants. So soil health is the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And you might have heard terms like soil degradation or topsoil loss. And it is possible for our soils to become unhealthy. And so we want to make sure that soils are healthy so that we can maintain the ability of those soils to grow plants. And there are a couple of things you can check, just sort of like a quick visual check of soil health in your garden. There are lots of things we can do. We can do lots of, and we'll get to the tests that we can do, but quick visual is if you are seeing living things in your soil. There are microorganisms that you won't be able to see, and then there are some of those invertebrates that you might be able to see, like earthworms or pill bugs or little leaf hoppers and things that will be in the soil. Just by a visual inspection, you can see some things. If you were to put it under a microscope, you might see even more living things in the soil. The soil structure is a visual indicator of how healthy a soil is. And when we say soil structure, there's a couple of different types of soil. There's sandy, loamy, and clay soil. And you really want to have a soil, that one right in the middle, the loamy soil. So soil that is not too gritty, not too full of sand, or not too thick, like clay. That perfect Goldilocks of loamy soil. And so that soil structure will be a visual inspection that you can do to determine if your soil is healthy for growing plants. And then water absorption as well. You can pour water into your garden bed. You can see if it pools around the plants, or if it is the Goldilocks of being absorbed and staying moist and wet, or if it just drains right through. Those are three quick visual indicators of soil health. One other indicator of soil health is how well does your garden grow? If you've planted a garden and you have some problems with growth, it might be an indicator that there's something happening in your soil. It doesn't have the nutrients or the right structure for your plants to be healthy. So other than those visual tests of how you can see if your soil is healthy, there are some tests you can do to actually check the texture or the nutrient levels in your soil. A simple soil test that you can do, Jackie's going to share a couple of slides of this experiment that we do with students in schools. You can take a scoop of soil, add it to a jar of water, shake it up, and then let it sit for 24 hours. And the different types of soil, the sand, loam, or clay will separate out in that jar, and you'll be able to see what kind of soil you have and that you're growing in. So Jackie will give us a little bit more detail on that. If you wanted to know more about the nutrient content in your garden, you could do a home test kit. These are available in many retail stores, probably in your local hardware store, or available for purchase online. And usually they just involve putting a little scoop of soil into a container, adding a bit of water, and either a drop of some sort of liquid dye or a little dissolvable tablet. And then that will tell you from a color comparison chart the level of nutrient that you have in your soil. And that can be used for the basic macronutrients in soil, the NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And it can also be something that can easily be done for the pH level of the soil, which certain plants like things acidic or like things a little bit more basic. And so you can test your soil to see if it's right for whatever plant you're looking to grow. If you're looking for something a little bit more intense and a fuller understanding of your soil content, I'd recommend that you send your soil out to a lab for an analysis. And you could do that. The Brooklyn College Urban Soils Lab, the Urban Soils Lab at the Brooklyn College is open again. It was closed during the pandemic for a while, and they accept samples of soil from across the US. So if you're not joining us from New York, from Nebraska, you can even take a sample of your soil and send it into the Brooklyn Urban Soils Lab. They will do a full analysis of nutrients, of heavy metals. And so if you're growing in urban soils, that's something that's a possibility for you to get and know the content of heavy metals in the soil, and provide you an analysis of that with some tips and recommendations for how to amend your soil. I have done this with a school garden that I've worked with, and it's kind of fun to get those results back, and you can choose from a whole slate of tests or just whichever individual test you're most interested in. But now to the fun experiment, soil science that you can do at home just to find out the texture of your soil. Jackie's going to talk to us about what she's been doing with students.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. So what I've been doing with our elementary school students is just basically gathering soil from an area that they're going to be either gardening or from a tree bed or even a garden. And the reason why we're doing this is a test and let them understand that there are different parts of soil. There's different textures. So like Kate mentioned, there's sand in here, there's silt, and there's clay. And there's another thing in there, there's humus. So this test helps them understand the organic matter is what really makes our soil. So what we do is we add you want to take about a clear jar, and you want to take about half of it, fill it with soil, and then you want to put just regular water. Tap water is fine. You make sure your jar has a lid. You're going to shake it up very fiercely, and it should be the consistency of like a milkshake. And you let it sit for 24 hours. And what's going to happen is, based upon the different locations where you got your soil, you're going to see different types of texture. So this first example was from a yard. So we can see that this particular soil was basically very sandy. And then it had a lot of clay. And if we go to the next sample, the next sample was from a forested area. So we see that there was also a lot of silt and a lot of clay. And then we also went to a beach area. So we could see from this that we saw a lot of sand as well. So by taking these different samples, students can learn that not all soil is the same. So when you do your soil samples, just make sure that they take precautions, that there are, pests around, or like little, residual things from animals, right? So here's the soil sample video that we show students afterwards. So they know that they're supposed to take their soil samples. I always recommend, as a good scientist, to do 3 types of experiments. So those are my 3 different soil samples. You just really need soil in a jar and water. That's really all you need. And then also label things. You want students to maybe journal, or even for yourself, you want to journal, because let's say you take a soil sample this year and next year you want to take another soil sample. You can tell if there's any variance that happens. So these are different locations, and I recorded it by photos, and I also recorded it in a book. So all 3 jars had the same amount of soil. I didn't include any of the rocks or leaves. This was just soil. I filled them all up equally with water. I shook them up, and I let them sit. So right now we're seeing a time lapse of 24 hours of this concoction of water and soil just settling. It's just gravity doing its thing. And at the end of the 24 hours, you're going to be able to see the most important part of the soil. So aside from seeing the bottom layer, which is sand, which is the heaviest particles, the silt and the clay, and they break down in this sort of pattern. So the heaviest particles will always be sand, then there'll be silt and there'll be clay, and they'll be in different variations, different percentages. But the most important part is the stuff that's hanging out at the top. That's the humus. And in Latin, humus means earth or ground. It's the most critical part of your garden and your soil. All right, so we're gonna go, Kate's gonna put up this soil calculator. It's online and it's interactive. It's a fun thing that students can do, or you can do yourself. All right.
Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, that's a really fun experiment to see as everything settles out into the different layers, and you just take a percentage of a rough percentage of what type of soil you have and put it into that calculator, and it'll tell you if you've got that perfect loamy soil. That's great for gardening. And as Jackie mentioned, the humus, the layer at the top, the organic living material in the soil, if you find that you don't have a lot of that, that's one of the reasons why compost is so great, because compost can help us to add that into our soil and amend our soil so that it has all of those nutrients that plants need to grow. So compost, this beautiful compost here, finished compost, is from Snug Harbor Compost Project. And this is some of the most beautiful finished compost I've ever seen. It's nice. You can see the screens in the background. They've screened it and shaken it. And so it's got all of the big chunks out of it. It looks beautiful. But compost is the nutrient-rich soil-like amendment that is the product of managed decomposition. So let's break that down a little bit. Nutrient-rich. Because it is made from plant material, food scraps, organic material, sometimes animal manure, it contains all of those macro and micronutrients that plants need to grow in a form that they can take up. So it's broken down into a small form that they can take up. It's soil-like in that it looks like soil, it looks like dirt, but one thing compost is lacking is that weathered rock that provides structure for plants to grow. So it's not the same as soil. It doesn't have what plant roots need to hold on to give them structure. It is the living material that is a part of soil. So that's why it's an amendment. You add it into the soil to add more of those nutrients. And it's the product of managed decomposition. So things will break down and turn into humus in the natural environment. But when we're talking about compost, it's materials that we've really worked through human management of those materials. So it's taking our veggie scraps here, but it could also be yard and garden waste, lawn clippings, animal manures. In this picture, these are some food scraps from my own home. And we collect them all together. You could be participating in a compost program where they're aggregated and taken like these food scraps in this compost pile, or you could be composting in your backyard. We'll get into the process of how to compost in your backyard in just a moment. But when in this situation, this has been taken to a municipal collection site. So this is a managed site in Red Hook, Brooklyn, possibly. I'm not quite sure exactly of the location yet. Jackie's affirming that this is from the Red Hook farms. And you can see in this picture, you can see the portion of the food is recognizable, but over time, as it's mixed with other ingredients, we begin to see that everything decomposes, it breaks down, we can't really recognize all of the materials, and then eventually it becomes this finished compost. So compost, why compost? It's turns it into something that's highly valuable and useful for our gardens. But beyond being useful for our gardens, compost really does help solve some other problems. This year, Jackie and I have been working with schools on sessions called Food, Waste, and Climate. And we have been really talking about the problem of food waste in the US, and that 30 to 40% of all food produced is wasted each year in the US, and that's pretty true across the globe as well. And when we waste food, we're really wasting all of those resources that go into the production of food, all of the love, all of the energy to grow that food. And it's a huge amount of land that we're using to grow the food that is wasted. So 30 to 40% of US food being wasted. If that were just farmland, it would be 3/4 the size of California dedicated to growing food that we do not use. It's unfortunate that 76% of landfill, and landfills are not great places for food waste. When we send our food to landfill, it breaks down very slowly in an anaerobic environment, and it produces methane gas, which is a greenhouse gas. And so we need to find another way of managing all of that food waste, and that's where compost comes in. And that's why Jackie and I work with the schools to make sure we can divert all of those food scraps to turn them into compost instead of sending them to landfill. So New York City does something about every 5 years, a waste composition study where they take a look at the residential trash in New York City and determine how much of it falls into each category. And 34% of waste in New York City from residential areas can be composted. That's a huge amount of waste that we could be separating out, and instead of paying to send to landfill, we could be taking and turning into compost. And in schools, it's even more. The school environment is very much, there are fewer activities in the school. You're learning or you're eating. Those are usually the two main activities, and they do tend to eat an awful lot in schools. And so 51% of materials thrown away from schools are organic waste. So there's a huge opportunity here for us to divert that from landfill and help to solve the food waste problems associated with food waste and to produce something that is useful. When we're talking about food waste, there is a food waste recovery hierarchy. So compost is, if you notice, way down at the bottom here, and I feel it's important to mention with any issue, especially around issues of the environment, the first layer should always be trying to reduce the problem in the first place. So with food waste, there should be source reduction done in growing crops only enough crops that we need, making sure that food is being distributed so that it's getting to those in need and those who are hungry. And then way down at the bottom before landfill, we can compost food. So compost benefit is not just to produce something for the garden, it also has an environmental positive benefit in preventing all of that food waste from going to the landfill. But this is the Beginner Gardener Intensive Workshop. We are here to learn about gardening. And so the benefit of compost is that it is great for our gardens and great for our soil health. It really helps to support healthy soil. It can, which support healthy plants. So compost can be added to soils that are full of sand or soils that have a lot of clay in them to help bring it more to the middle of that loamy texture. It might be really hard to get an extremely clayey soil or an extremely sandy soil completely you won't just be able to turn it into loam, but the addition of compost over time can help. Another way that you could do that, if you do have soils that are too sandy or too clayey, you can use raised beds, mix a lot more compost with your soil, and in that way, you can amend the soil. Compost retains water in your garden, and so as you're gardening, it depends on where your water source is or what your water use restrictions are, but as gardeners, we know we want our soil to remain moist for as long as possible so we can cut down on all of that watering that plants require. And so when we add compost into soil, it forms aggregates, it forms clumps, and those clumps act as sponges and keep the water instead of allowing the water to drain out of your soil beds. And compost, because it is living, because soil is living and has all of those microorganisms, but compost especially is rich in microorganisms. They've just broken down all of this material, and those microorganisms are often beneficial in helping to make those nutrients more available to plants. So the compost is great at delivering food to plants where they need it most in their root areas. And when you're growing with compost, your plants are more vigorous, they're more healthy, and so they'll resist pests and resist disease better. It doesn't mean that compost will eliminate pests and disease. It just means that your plants are healthy. And as we know, like when we're healthy and our immune system is high, a cold might not knock us out as much as when we're run down and we're struggling in other areas. So it's the same with plants. If we really build up their health, they're going to be able to withstand those inevitable pests and disease that come along with gardening. Other benefits, as we discussed beyond the garden, are preventing erosion from holding on to all of that water. It prevents the soil from being washed away. We can decrease the amount of chemicals that we use when we're gardening by using compost as a fertilizer instead of a synthetic fertilizer. And that's really important because the soil is living. And when we use chemical fertilizers or chemical pesticides, we might also harm those living things in the soil and decrease the biodiversity in the soil. So compost, conversely, actually increases that biodiversity and really helps soil to thrive. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So all of that food waste or garden waste or animal manure that may have been sent, and animal manure usually isn't sent to the landfill, but the garden waste or food scraps sent to a landfill, when they break down, release greenhouse gases. And so by composting, we're decreasing that. And then carbon sponge. This one is really cool. We'll learn about it at the very end of the session, but compost helps soil to sequester carbon, to take carbon out of the atmosphere and hold onto it in the soil. And it can be used as a tool to mitigate climate change. So now that we know all the amazing benefits of compost and everything compost can do, I think we've scratched the surface of what compost can do. It's pretty amazing stuff. I'm sure you all want to know how to actually compost. So when we're composting, we're really setting up a nice cozy home for all of these creepy, crawly, cute, whatever you want to call them, decomposer organisms. And so there's a whole food chain that happens around decomposing organic material. And it's these creatures that are really doing the work of breaking down all of our organic materials, our food scraps, our garden waste, and turning it into those smallest particles that they can become a finished compost product. So meet the FBI. Those are the fungi, bacteria, and insects that do the job of breaking down all of our materials. And I love working with students and hearing them say, ew, or be grossed out. You've always got the crew of students that run away and then the crew of students that sort of get closer to see the insects. But I like to get everyone in and to see and try to at least find one thing in the compost pile. And so once you determine that you want to create a home for all these creepy crawlies in your space so that you can make compost, you need to figure out how you're going to do that. If you have space and you have a larger quantity of materials, or maybe you're a part of a community garden or a school community, a backyard compost bin is something that might be right for you. If you're maybe in an apartment or you've got a smaller quantity of materials, a worm bin is a great option. That's something that's a little bit more self-contained, can still manage a fairly large quantity of materials, but doesn't require the space and the setup that a backyard compost bin would require. So here we've got a couple of examples of what some bins look like. These are the most common bins that I see everywhere. You can see many different versions of these, but there's like the standalone stationary cube bin, great for a couple of classes to contribute to in a school. You'll continuously add to that bin, or you might do a batch add where you just completely fill it and then manage it as it breaks down. But you can also continuously add materials as they become available into that bin. And as you add them and stir them, they'll break down and materials will go towards the bottom where you can harvest the finished compost. The next type of bin is a tumbler. These are great for school yards that maybe don't have or homes that don't have soil available, like where you can place the bin. They are off ground, they're contained, so they might be something that you'd be interested in if you were concerned about pests getting into your compost because they are sealed by clasps. They don't have that soil to compost connection, and so you do have to inoculate the tumbler with a scoop full of soil from your garden, so you can kickstart all of those microorganisms, the fungi, bacteria, and insects in the bin doing their work. They will find their way in there, but it's just a little bit harder. Worms aren't necessarily going to get up into that tumbler unless you inoculate with a scoop of dirt. Once you inoculate with a scoop of dirt, those populations will expand in that bin. The 3-bin system down here is a bigger system if you are maybe a community garden, or you're planning to do way more composting with your school than just a few classrooms. The 3-bin system is great because it allows you to collect a large quantity, and then as you fill up one bin, you then flip it over, turn it over into the next bin to start a new collection, and then keep on flipping your materials down into the next bin until at the end you have a finished compost product. And these costs down here are estimates. For the 3-bin system, I have $0 to $1,000. I have built a compost bin, a 3-bin compost bin, out of pallets that I found and materials that I found, zero cost. I have also built a bin out of materials that I bought from a lumberyard with really nice hardware. And so you can do this at varying levels of expense. And the same with the worm bin, varying levels of expense. If you've got a container at home, you just need to poke a few holes in it. And if you have someone who already has a worm bin, you can take some of their worm colony to start your own worm bin, or you can purchase all of the materials. But this worm bin is great for apartment or classroom composting. Worms will eat their weight in food every single day. So if you have a pound of worms, they can eat through a pound of food materials in a week. So you decide which kind of bin you're interested in. Then it's time to start collecting and adding materials to your bin. So for most of us, that's going to be food scraps and garden and yard waste. The food scraps are considered greens, and some of the garden and yard waste are considered greens. If they're fresh clippings off of a plant and they're still living, that would be a green material that you're adding into your compost bin. So that includes grass clippings, coffee grounds, and tea bags are great. Of course, vegetable and food scraps, trimmings from plants, weeds that haven't set seed yet. And that's important. If your weed has set seed, you do not want to include it in your compost bin because you do not want to possibly be spreading weeds across your garden when you use that compost. Eggshells, and then for some people, it might also include animal manures. It's important to note that these are all vegetarian-fed animals, so grazing animals or chickens and rabbits, no manures from animals that eat a meat-based diet because those could contain harmful bacteria and might not break down in our compost pile. Those are the greens. Those are the really moisture-rich materials. And they're nitrogen-rich. The browns are materials that we add to balance out the greens. If we just had greens in a compost bin, it would turn into a really putrid, stinky, horrible situation. Your neighbors, whomever's around you, would not be happy about you having rotting vegetables out in your garden. But when you add it with browns, which are carbon-rich, drier materials, that really helps to absorb a lot of that moisture. It helps to keep air in the bin that all of those microorganisms need to grow, and it helps to just helps to keep it all nice. So browns can be leaves, pine needles, small twigs and things that are broken up, straw or hay, sawdust. In the worm bin, it could be shredded newspaper or shredded brown paper bags. And so those things you want to add basically with a 50-50 mix to begin with. And you can always adjust as you begin to notice what's happening in your compost pile. Just want to point out the things to avoid. I kind of already mentioned them, but in our home compost bin, we're not going to include meats, fish, oils, pastas, or grains. Those things can really, they're harder to break down for one thing, but they can also really attract the pests that we don't want to attract into our garden. You don't want to include cat or dog feces, so that's not animal manure to put into your compost pile. Weeds that have gone to seed and diseased plants. Both of those things might not be fully, if the compost pile unless you're really managing it and checking temperatures over a period of time, it might not reach the temperature level for the time period required to kill the seed or kill the disease. And you might end up spreading those items to your garden. If you do have a lot of weeds or a lot of diseased plants, you can start a separate compost pile. Just leave those materials to the side and know that that's not compost you're going to use in your garden. You might just let it sit for a really long time and then just leave it there. It'll just break down. So with that 50-50 mix of green and browns, you should be pretty good, but you're going to notice things as you're composting. You might notice that your compost pile is too wet and that it maybe has a little bit of a bad smell. When we have too much moisture in a compost pile, it can turn anaerobic. That means that it's breaking down without the presence of oxygen. And oxygen is those microorganisms that do all of the breaking down of the plants. They need oxygen. They're not going to survive or thrive in a pile that is too moist and waterlogged. And when that happens, anaerobic decomposition is really stinky. So if you have a bad smell, check the moisture level of your pile. And the solution to that would be to add a lot more brown materials, those things that absorb moisture and add air into a pile, really stir them into the pile and turn it over so that you're getting air into all of the areas of your pile and getting the browns mixed in really well. And then I would just check the location of your pile. The first compost I ever managed, I had this problem that it was always waterlogged. And it happened to be that it was located under a sloping roof of a garage. And I didn't put the bin there, I inherited the bin there. But that sloping roof of the garage, every time there was a rainfall, it just soaked into my compost pile, and I had to move my compost pile to solve that problem. So check the location of your pile to make sure it's not collecting rain. It's not a rainwater barrel, it's a compost pile. Another issue, the opposite, is that it might be too dry or not hot. And by hot, I mean, as your materials break down, all of those microorganisms that are doing their work create energy, they create heat. So your compost pile will get hot as it's breaking down. And a great temperature for a compost pile, you can get a compost thermometer. A great temperature is about and I'm going to say about 140 is ideal. So maybe 120 to 160 is a range that your compost pile will be in. And if it's not hot, or if it's too dry, it just means that your pile is just kind of sitting there stagnating. And so you'll want to add more greens, more of the wet content and more of the food sources to get those microorganisms going, rev up the engine of the compost pile. Or you could just water it as well. Maybe it's been a really hot few weeks and the compost pile is dried out. You can just put a hose on it or a watering can. If you have plants growing in your pile, this is often a common question people ask, like, I've got compost and it's growing things. It's important to remember, do not add those weeds because you don't want to have weed seed germinate all in your compost pile. You can add weeds that haven't gone to seed yet. So if they haven't flowered and you've just been pulling weeds, great, add them to the pile. But if they've got seeds, don't add them. You're just going to spread it. And then enjoy whatever's growing in your compost pile. If you've been putting food scraps into that pile, you might have an avocado. Right now, I have something that I have to figure out if it's a cucumber, a zucchini, or a squash, but I definitely got some sort of cucumbery squash plant growing in my compost pile. So I'm going to take those and put them in a garden and see what I get. But other than avocado and squash, other common things to grow in a compost pile might be peppers. If you've just put in a bunch of peppers and all those little seeds, those might germinate and grow as well. If you're not going to do a backyard compost bin, you can still participate in this process of collecting your food scraps to turn into compost. Through our compost collection sites. Grow NYC manages a lot of compost collection sites throughout the city. We were managing 76 prior to the pandemic. They shut down for a while, but we reopened. They were one of the first organics collections to reopen. And we have about 16 to 20 sites open now, with more coming online, getting back to our pre-pandemic levels as the fall rolls around. The residential curbside organics collection program is coming back in October of this year to places that had it previously. And school organics collection, which was on hold for this year, is returning in the fall. So some really great news there that those programs we had where we can all participate in organics collection are reopening. You can go to our website at grownyc.org/compost to find out where those locations are and what is accepted at those locations. They'll actually take some breads and grains and pastas and things at these collection sites because they're being managed a little bit differently than our backyard composting systems. And so the finished compost, whether you're doing it in your garden, in a worm bin, or you're participating in a community compost collection site and then going to a compost give back where you can actually get the compost, your finished compost can be used in a couple of different ways in your garden. You can, if you're preparing planting in pots, you can add it to your potting mix to add that boost of nutrients and water retention to your potting mix in pots. If you're just preparing your garden beds, you can mix it right on in with your garden beds. I do, at least 30% compost in your garden bed, possibly even more if you want. You don't want to do full compost because it doesn't have that structure plants need to grow, but you can mix it into your garden beds. That's all before plants are in there, right? Before you have a plant in a pot or before you have plants in your raised beds. If you already have established plants in your beds, you're going to want to just use compost to top dress or to put around the plant. And then as you water the plant, the nutrients from that compost is going to seep into the soil to provide nutrients to the roots where the plants need it. You don't want to disturb the soil necessarily because you might disturb the root structure of the plants. So just adding it around the top of your plant, you can add it as frequently as once a month around the top of your plants to give your food, your plants that nutrient growth burst, that little extra food during their growing season. If you don't have a garden, or even if you do have a garden, but you have an excess of compost, a really great use of it is to treat our street trees. If you look at our trees in New York, you'll see a great big giant tree, and you'll look down at the base of the tree and you will see a little square of patch of dirt, and the rest of it is concrete around that tree. And so the tree is taking nutrients out of the soil, it's taking water out of the soil, but those nutrients aren't being returned as they are in the natural cycle when leaves fall off of a tree and they break down in the soil around the tree, providing food for that tree. Those leaves are being swept away, and the trees are really not participating in a nutrient cycle. We're taking the nutrients away from them. So treat your street trees by giving them a little bit of your compost, and they will be happier and healthier. And we all love having nice trees in our city. So we are just getting to the last part where we're really going to make the wrap up and the connection between soil, compost, and climate. We all love having healthy plants and growing things in our gardens, but there is a larger connection that the soil and compost has to our environment. And just quickly, I'm going to do what is climate change. A lot of you joining us today probably have a very deep understanding of the issues that we're facing, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of a taste of what we've discussed with our students. We talk about the difference between weather versus climate. And if we look outside our window, we'll see it's a little bit overcast today. It might be sunny and shining. Sun might be shining where you are, but I've got some clouds outside. And I can look the weather up online and see what's going to happen over the next few days. That's the weather. It's what's happening in the atmosphere right here, right now. And it usually behaves itself pretty much predictably for a period of time, and we can predict the weather. Climate refers to the general weather patterns over a broader area, over a longer period of time. So climate really is a representative of it represents the average of weather. And as weather makes little changes here and there, that average and the climate is changing, and that's what we're experiencing right now. Climate change is it's happening, it's real, we're experiencing the effect. And scientists are able to tell that we're experiencing the effect because they've been tracking things for a long time. So they've been tracking weather patterns for over 100 years, and they found that global temperatures have increased 2 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880. Other things that indicate climate change is that the warmest years recorded have happened, and this is actually an old statistic. It's actually 20 of the last 20 years have been the warmest years on record. And so I think 2020 and 2021 surpassed one of those years that wasn't one of the hottest on record. And that's causing there to be melting ice, which is causing sea level rise. So there are indicators. We know the climate is changing, and so we know we need to take action. And that's where protecting our soils and participating in a food economy where we compost can really make a difference. Soils that are healthy and rich in organic matter grow great lush plants, and those plants through photosynthesis breathe in carbon dioxide and store that carbon in their plant bodies and in their roots and into the soil. And so we're just going to watch. Jumped ahead of myself. We're going to watch a video in just a minute. The soil is a huge carbon sink, but through our agricultural practices of heavy crop production and machine use and leaving fields barren for years at a time, we've lost a lot of that carbon in our soil. And so we need to get back to a regenerative form of agriculture where we are leaving plants, maybe cover crops are being used on fields, or crop residue, like the harvested parts of the plants that we don't use are left on the fields instead of being removed from the fields. And that all helps to break down, add organic content into the soil, and also prevent soil from being washed away during rain events, which is one of the leading causes of us losing carbon in the soils. So we're going to watch this great video. It's just about 1.5 minutes long, but I think this guy really explains this process better than I ever could.
Fields were plowed and disked year after year, and that kind of farming throughout the world, we've probably lost 50 to 80% of the soil organic matter, that soil humus, over the last 150 years. Soil stores an incredible amount of carbon, and the only way it stores carbon is through plant photosynthesis and through the development of soil organic matter. If we can restore the carbon that used to be in the soil, it's a win-win, baby. We're talking a win-win because it's taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, putting it back into the soil. It improves soil productivity, diversity of life, everything from wildlife to the crops we can grow. It reduces the amount of irrigation water that we need to apply. It just does incredible things. But I worry about the future generations. This is critical to them, that we learn how to develop a regenerative agriculture. And to do that, we have to start with building soil health. It's critical. And how do we do that? Do it by putting the carbon back into it.
Conservationists like Richard King have shown us that living soil has an enormous capacity to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and store it in the ground. But you don't have to be a farmer to help rebuild soil health. You can help by composting, by planting a garden, and by buying organic food. Spread the word about the important role building healthy soil.
Okay, so that's it. We are going to thank you for, sorry, just don't want to have it. Thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions, I know there were several questions coming in the chat. I didn't get all of them as they were flying in, but we will take some time to answer questions.
All right, thank you so much, Kate. We do have a lot of questions, so we'll see how many we can get to today. Someone has a question about composting. Why are there flies in their compost bin?
So flies are a natural decomposer, and there will be flies in your compost bin. I don't know of any way to prevent flies in the compost bin. If you're talking about an outside compost bin, for a worm bin inside, flies can be a nuisance and a problem, and there is a solution for that. When we're composting inside, if we freeze the fruits and vegetables before adding them to the worm bin, it will kill any fruit fly eggs. And I suppose fly eggs, if there were fly eggs on the peels and the skins, but mostly fruit fly eggs. And then add that into the bin, and so you won't be generating generations of fruit flies. But outside, flies are a part of it. There are going to be flies on the compost bin.
Got it.
Oh,
All right, someone else.
Oh, I also mentioned, like, you want to cover your food scraps. You don't have them on the top layer. You want to cover it with a brown, right?
Great idea. Yes. All right, so someone has a lot more yard waste than food waste. Will that imbalance make bad compost, or can it still work?
It can totally still work. So there's the only thing you want to avoid is having too much wet material. And so you want to have a mix of your dry yard waste with your wet materials. If you have a lot of grass clippings, you might want to spread them out so they dry out quicker. I don't know if we've all experienced clumps of grass clippings breaking down together. They get a bit stinky, but if you spread it out, let the air dry it out a little bit, that will help to create a better balance. It will break down. It might take a little bit longer for full yard waste compost to break down than if you had some of that really activating hot, like food items that the FBI really like to decompose.
All right, where in New York City can we pick up compost for our garden? Do you know if DSNY is doing compost givebacks?
I don't know if there are any compost givebacks scheduled right now. Throughout the year, DSNY does plan and do compost givebacks. So I would just do a Google search for DSNY compost giveback, and we'll put something in our follow-up materials as well about where to go and look for that information. I don't know of any that are scheduled right now, and that might just be a pandemic thing.
Yeah, I saw they had put them on hold, but they might be coming back, so it's worth checking out. I also know the community garden near me does small compost givebacks too, so you might want to look into your nearby community gardens. Someone is wondering, can pet feces be used in compost?
No. So this is a no, especially if you're using it to grow food. Because our animals eat a diet that is meat-based, there are bacteria and diseases and things that don't fully get processed in their digestive tracts, and those diseases can be passed on through their feces, and a compost pile will not necessarily kill that. And so you could be introducing some bad things into your garden that you don't want to. We all know of cats and their feces and diseases for pregnant women through cat feces. So we don't use those materials in a compost bin. If you have rabbits or hamsters or a vegetarian diet pet, you could use their bedding as well as their waste in your compost bin. It actually will really fire up your compost bin.
Okay. This one is an easy yes or no. Can I put fruits or veggies that have gone bad or rotten into my compost?
Absolutely. Best place to put rotten fruits and veggies is into your compost. Tip here for the food waste hierarchy, take a look at your fridge every now and then. If you see something's about to go bad and you're not going to eat it, stick it in the freezer. It can be a smoothie, it can be a soup, it can be a lot of different things, but I'm going to do that in the next few days because I've got some veggies on the cusp of turning.
A good tip. Someone asked a question about how to make compost tea, which was something we mentioned yesterday. And I believe we can put that in the follow-up resources because you have a recipe for that. I think you presented on last year, correct, Kate?
Yeah, it's so funny. I went back and forth on including that in this year.
We only have time for so much, but we'll put that in the follow-up resources. So we got some questions about contaminated soil, and they're wondering if they planted tomatoes in the backyard already and they didn't test the soil. I'm guessing this is an urban soil. Will they still be safe to eat?
That's a hard question to answer without having tested your soil and fully know. I would say if your soil is not directly underneath your building, like if it's a little bit further out, the contamination is going to come from when we had lead in our fuel and it precipitated out of the exhaust from our fuel into the soil. That's probably long gone. And lead in paint chips is another source of contamination for soil. And so if it's away from the home, you probably don't have paint chips in it. Another contaminant is arsenic from wood products, depending on if you have treated wood or untreated wood. It's hard to answer. I think you're probably okay. Not all of the heavy metals get taken up, and it's probably better to have tomatoes than leafy vegetables because you're not eating you're eating the fruits, not the sort of the leaf, the production powerhouse of the plant.
Yeah, I would say to add to that, the leafy vegetables and the root vegetables are the ones that have a higher chance of containing the contaminants.
Yeah.
I put in the chat a fact sheet from the EPA on contaminated urban soil, so it's kind of like a judgment call that you all can make. What is organic compost? Is it using only organic food scraps?
I would, here is, and I would assume so. Like I think.
Oh, Kate, your microphone is in robot, having that robot issue.
What issue? Someone else want to answer this one?
Jackie, do you want to?
Yeah, I can answer that. So sometimes some manufacturers might say organic on their compost in the back, but what organic really means, and we all know it, is something that was living or once living. That's the true meaning of organic. Now, organic could also mean no GMOs, no pesticides. So I use compost that is non-organic, like, you know, like it's organic because it's from my fruits and veggie scraps, but I don't make a precedent that it's only from an organic manufacturer. Does that make sense? So I think it's safe to use something that's just from your regular scraps.
Great, thank you. How many locations in your yard should you be testing the soil? I can take a stab at that one. I think you just want to test where you're growing. And also if you're sending it to a lab, they'll probably have their own directions on where you should grab sample soils from, but you don't need to like test your entire lawn, just where you're growing in your garden. We have a question on, so a school garden is putting together a raised bed. Do they have to add compost? How often should you add compost to raised beds? And should it be mixed in or layered on top?
Laura, or since I
can take a stab at this one too. I wasn't sure if Kate was back online with us.
I have come back on. I didn't hear the question and I love my frozen face at the bottom there. Great. Oh, it's gone. Good. I'm glad it's gone.
Well, this one, I'll take a stab at it. So they're putting together a raised bed. We do recommend adding compost to your soil if you're starting a new raised bed, and it depends how good quality the soil is. If you're getting like that expensive, nice potting soil, you don't need to add much compost, maybe just a little layer on top, an inch or two. If you're getting topsoil, which it basically has no nutrients in it, you can go as high as like a 50-50 mix of topsoil and compost. But keep in mind, when you use topsoil like that, it might take a couple of years for the soil to really become super nutritious and grow really well. So we recommend each spring before you plant to replenish your beds with a little bit of soil or a little bit of compost, an inch or two again. And you don't have to go wild with like mixing it in, making sure it gets to the bottom, but you can give it a little rake through.
And I also just want to recommend that when you've done growing, you could grow a cover crop in your bed that you could then dig under, and that will help to add nutrients back into the soil. Perhaps it could be a nitrogen fixing crop like clover or something. So if you just plant, it's usually a cheap seed, you just plant a crop like that, and then in the spring you've already got some materials to dig into your bed.
Great. I do want to note we hit the 5 o'clock mark. So if you do have to go, we want to be respectful of people's time, and we hope to see you tomorrow. We're going to hang around and answer maybe like 2 or 3 more questions for you. And we'll give you a quick look maybe at the distance learning page where you can find all of our resources, and you'll be getting a follow-up email as well with all the links you need. So thank you for joining us. If you want to stick around, we'll answer a few more questions. The next question we have is, if a potted plant had aphids or a fungal infection in it, infestation, can they reuse that soil for other potted plants?
With an aphid infestation, if you've gotten rid of the aphids, I might reuse that soil. A fungal infection, I guess it depends on the severity of it. I wouldn't. I would start fresh with new soil. You could always scoop that soil off to the side, leave it for a good few months, and then use it again.
Cool. Is it okay to put grains and pasta in a food scrap pail that you're dropping at the city compost collection sites?
So the best thing to do is to go to www.grownyc.org/compost, and there's a link directly there that says what you can include in the collection. It does differ depending on who's managing the site and where those materials are being sent. I think that grains at our collection sites, grains, breads, pasta are accepted. At some other collection sites that maybe are being processed in a community garden, they might not want those items.
Yeah, and you can also just chat with whoever is actually collecting the food scraps at your site, because they'll know for that specific site where are your food scraps going to which facility, so they'll be able to better advise you as well. And I'm just going to do one more, which is an interesting, kind of funny question. Someone is wondering in their compost bin if they have moles that are coming in and out of their compost bin, I guess, are being attracted to the food in there. What can they do about that?
Yeah, well, the not easy answer is you can put a layer of maybe 3 to 6 inches of gravel underneath your compost bin, and that will prevent any burrowing animal from getting in. So I've done that on a 3-bin compost system that was in a community garden. We didn't want to invite rats, so we put down a heavy layer of gravel underneath. You can also try, like chicken wire, but a little bit, for moles, I think chicken wire would be the right size, but for rodents, maybe a little bit smaller than that chicken wire size. You can also line your bin with that to help prevent rodents from getting in.
The 1/4 inch hardware mesh.
Yes, thank you. That's
yes.
Chicken wire.
And this is a perfect segue. Someone in the chat was just asking about how can they find the recording from yesterday. So that's what Kate is showing us right now. And you should also have this link in your email that you got today as a reminder. So if you go to grownycdistancelearning.org, that's where you'll find everything.
There you go. That has the URL in it. And there's, there are blog posts from the last year. We started this pretty much right at pandemic. So there are blog posts going back a year, and there are also some great virtual tours of our teaching garden. A lot of great stuff on here.
And so if you click learn, that'll take you to our most recent posts. And so that's where you'll see yesterday's recording. That's where we're going to post today's recording and for the rest of the week. So thank you all so much for joining us. remember to tune in tomorrow. We have increasing garden production, how to grow for donations or just to produce a lot more food. And then on Friday, we're doing our how to become an indoor gardening genius. So we have 2 more really fun workshops for you. They'll be at 4 p.m. Eastern time, same place. And we'll see you then. Thank you all so much. You can use your same Zoom link tomorrow. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.